You're listening to the Cash News Podcast with Tom Meehan and Shaun Ferrari.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Cash News Podcast. I think we're episode 22. I could be wrong, but I think that's definitely the episode. Behind me, before I turn it over to Shaun, you see us both kind of excited that we're going to be live in just wow, what is it? Just a few weeks at Currency Research. So we've got all of our banners ready, and I know Shaun's going to talk a little about that. But over to, as always, my co-host and friend Shaun Ferrari. What's going on, Shaun?
Well, you mentioned it. It's really at the moment a lot of prep for the upcoming Banknote and Currency Conference in a mere few weeks now, February 21 to 24 in DC. So that's really all consuming at the moment as we're up over 500 delegates. So we're excited about that from all over the world coming in, and the COVID numbers are trending down in DC pretty significantly. So things are looking good. So we're excited about it. We're pulling it together, and right now it's just the fun time of speaker juggling and topic juggling and making sure everybody can come and get into the country okay, all that fun stuff. So that's what's going on right now, in addition to everything going on in the world of cash and payments, which we're going to chat a little bit about today. But I am thrilled that I just get to hang out behind you in your office all day, just kind of sitting there. If people want to, we can put those banners up for sale. If anybody wants a banner like that, feel free to let us know, and we too can be in your office 24 hours a day.
Yeah, and so I'm in my office today, which I haven't been in my office in a while, and it's actually exciting to come back. And I can't use. I'm going to show everybody for the folks that actually watch this. I can't use our cash news background that I always use, because then we get stuck there. So this is the view of the background, which is a pretty cool view. I mean, but it throws it all off. So the virtual background doesn't play nice, but the banner looks great. And I mean, I would be remiss to say we have a lot of fun when we're together. Our guests really have a lot of fun. So I'm really looking forward to it. And we're going to do, I think we're not fully sure if it's 4 or 3 days, but we're gonna do some live stuff there. We know we'll get participation. We're really excited to see everybody there. I jokingly said I've got a couple of these banners, so they might just pop up anywhere. So if you're in DC, you might see us, even if you don't mean to intend to. And if you are in DC and you live in DC, you're gonna be in DC, and you're not already registered for this conference, you should be. Especially if you're listening to this podcast. I mean,
especially if you're listening to the podcast.
If you're listening to this podcast and you're not going to be there, then you're probably going to miss out, because all of the things we talk about related to cash, currency, and payments are going to happen in real time. We'll have 500 or more people there, and it's going to be really exciting. I'm super excited to be there just with Shaun, but then also I'm going to get some time up there to talk on the stage about cybersecurity trends and strategies. That's super, super exciting to get out there, and the world of cybersecurity is wild right now, so it'll be fun. But I want to talk about a couple of things that popped up in the last few weeks, and one was a study that was done in the UK. And I know that our listener base, because we can see our listener base, there are some international listeners. As if you're a podcast person, you probably know that we are available on any platform, which makes it actually pretty tough for us to tell where people are listening from, because some platforms are really good to share and others aren't. But we do know we have some international folks. But I thought the study was interesting, even though it was out of the UK. There was some Canadian information there as well. And there was some US, but it was very highly focused on Europe. But the US information that I thought was interesting is that 92% of payments that could be done contactlessly were done. And what I went through and dug in to see how this is written. So the basic premise is, if the merchant accepted contactless payment, Apple Pay, any of the contactless Venmo. So this is QR or tap. This is where it gets interesting. So it's a little bit subjective that 9 out of 10 people opted to that when it was an option. Now, the study doesn't talk about it, and it wouldn't be able to, right? What it means when there wasn't payments, doesn't really, this isn't versus cash. This was really traditional credit card versus that. So there really wasn't a lot of data on it. But it's also important to note that, and this is an interesting number, that it only went up about 10%. So the behavior didn't change as much, but what did change is the penetration of merchants actually accepting a contactless payment. And in Europe, a lot more data, right? Because Europe has been further along in this pace. In that place, they can actually say that 90% of the credit card transactions in the UK were contactless. That's a big number. I also think there's some subjectivity in here because when you look at the sample size of where it is, but we are constantly talking about consumer trends. The interesting thing here is Javelin Research, and not a lot of folks probably are listening have heard of Javelin Research. If you're in the fraud and risk space, you may have. They're an independent research company, and I actually worked on a study many years ago, might have been 10 years ago with them on fraud and consumer payments. It was a LexisNexis study that I was involved in. So I try to follow Javelin just because, I thought the study was really good. I mean, no bias at all. When Javelin writes a study, they write a study. Like so sometimes I think these studies are funded by groups and it works in their favor, and other times it doesn't. But interestingly enough, the study was on cash usage and payment of choice. And what that makes this, I think, a little different than some of the other ones is that they actually went out and got a sample size of consumers. They didn't take retail data and they didn't take consumer, trend data. They actually went out and spoke to people. And in the populace that they spoke to, overwhelmingly, the folks they're speaking to, when available for smaller denomination purchases, cash was the preferred method. And this is the interesting part here is they actually went and spoke to people, and some of the things that were said. And Shaun and I don't want to speak for Shaun, but I'm pretty neutral, and I'm not a big conspiracy theorist. I'm pretty neutral in when people start getting into privacy, what's real and what's not. I believe my personal and professional opinion in the risk space is we as Americans have given up a lot of our privacy to get offerings using social media and things. So anytime privacy comes into play, I think it's an interesting one. But the 66% of the people they spoke to chose cash because it was financially secure and they felt that it had a privacy element that credit cards didn't. And this is the interesting part. That people generally are starting to change the tides of, man, sometimes I don't want the phone call or the email about something. I really just want to buy my item and move out. So 66% of the folks in this opted for privacy and financial security, and they talked about it. The other thing was 63% of the people saying allowing people to pay in cash is important to society. Some people need to pay in cash, and it's important. So interestingly enough, and just because I know Javelin, I know that these aren't prompted. I know that the way their studies work. So it's very interesting to hear that people recognize the societal need of cash, especially in smaller denomination. Cash is safer to use than any other form of payment. I think we all talk about that every time. While I think certainly credit cards and contactless payment are safe, that note in your hand is by far the safest, right? It's there. You're not, yes, you could lose it, but other than losing it, there's not a lot of risk for you there. And then it's important to today, even with what's going on today, it's more important today than ever. 54% of people said it's more important today than ever because, back to our top, it's secure, it's tangible. So we talked about COVID and some of the consumer trends we saw, but then we also know that more money came out of the banks, people were holding on to it, and more money were in the pocket and the wallet. And then this is the one that I often say, and remember, I'm a technologist. My whole entire career, all 25 years of it, is based on technology. Even though my full-time job, 50% of what I do is protecting cash, I'm still a technologist. That's what my lifeblood is. And here's the thing that I always go back to. Cash is by far the easiest way to make a payment and reconcile the payment, right? You don't have to worry about a bill coming. You don't have to worry about an auto payment. When you hand that dollar over, the transaction is done. You get the goods and it moves. So I know, Shaun, you and I talk about this, but I definitely wanted to kind of just have open conversation about it.
Yeah, no, I mean, so many of those are good points. I'm going to go back to where you started, probably with the UK piece a little bit, and what's going on there. I think we work a lot with a gentleman named David Hensley, and he was part of he really authored the access to cash work that's done out of the UK, and the whole onset of tap and go in the UK really changed the landscape of cash use and payments. As you say, not 90%, whatever that study showed, 90% of credit card payments or whatever were tap and go at this point in the UK. I don't know what a similar number would be in the US, but my guess would be around 10%. Just my that's just Shaun speaking. I have no data on that. But a very small amount, I think, in the US compared to what's going on in the UK is tap and go. Many people still don't even know you can tap and go in the US. Like I'll be at stores and I'll be like, can I just, and they'll be like, what are you doing? Just slide it or put it in. And like, I don't think I have to, and it'll work. And the people at the store will be like, oh my God, that's so neat. I'm like, okay, cool. But that's not the case in the UK. It was a definitive push to go to tap and go. And what they saw was cash use in particular plummeted, because the UK, and this is where I was talking with a lot of folks around the world, and they were like, well, when tap and go takes off in the US, get ready, it's going to get rid of cash. And what's overlooked in that statement is the denominator of where cash use is to start. So the UK had something along the lines of like 70% of transactions were still being done in cash a couple of years ago. It was a very high percentage of cash use. And then tap and go got pushed. And yes, it ate into cash use big time, and it dropped down into, I forget what the numbers are, but it's 20 or 30% or something like that. So it was a huge decline in cash use over a very short period of time with tap and go that came in. And that created some big problems for the UK. And there's task force set up with the central bank and the government and the post office, who delivers a lot of cash in the UK, and the commercial banks and the armored carriers, the whole cash ecosystem, to basically say, how do we ensure the acceptance of cash? Because there's people throughout this country that rely on it. So it gets back to the point of, to your survey that Javelin did, it's important for society to have cash accepted. And the UK found that. And one of the statements that David Hensley always uses to talk about it, and the report highlights, is don't sleepwalk into a cashless society, right? And we said that before here, but that's where it came from. That's where that saying that I like to quote a lot has come from, because that's what sort of happened. Tap and go came in, cash disappeared, and society wasn't ready for it. So we're trying to use that case study of what happened in the UK to go around to other countries and talk about it at these conferences and events. And we will have a panel on this with David Hensley on it, access to cash. It's going to be a really good panel during the event in DC, to show how different central banks and different countries are thinking about this. Because in the US, tap and go didn't have this experience. One, it didn't roll out nearly as powerfully as it did in the UK. And secondly, we're already at a relatively low percentage of cash use. So the UK is coming from 70% and then coming down. We're already at like 20, 30%, right? So that's where the UK like plummeted to. We're already there. And the economy's kind of, and the cash ecosystem's kind of built for that already. So it's kind of, rather than tap and go taking a whole lot of cash use, it's more just, again, another way that the same people that were already paying with credit cards or their iPhone or whatever, those are the same people that are using tap and go. So it's not really affecting cash use all that much here. So it's just very different. Anyway, that was a whole lot on that.
No, I think it's a great point, and I think it's also important that in that study that was not the US, they talked about it, is they made a very, very clear distinction that they, out of the retailers that had the ability to contactless pay in the US, they seen the increase. I also would say that and you hit the nail on the head. I think I still very much, it's funny, we didn't rehearse this. We don't rehearse, so kids can't tell. I actually have experienced multiple times where I'll tap the card like, no, we don't do that here. And then it works. And they're like, oh my goodness. And it's more just me and trying to be quicker, right? Like for me, I worked in retail for many, many years, and in many of those years, 22 years, 14 of them, I worked in an upscale retailer where I will tell you that I got used to the full service environment. And now I'm like, when I go to a store, I want to be in and out. I don't want to mess around. Like, between work, travel, and all the things going on, like, it's like, I want that payment, if I can increase that transaction. And while I seem to carry, and this is a real actually phenomenon for me, I actually carry more cash now than I did before. And I think it's because a lot of the banks closed. And although I don't use a lot of cash, I found myself not wanting to drive an extra 10 minutes. And I actually took more money out. Like, I have money in my pocket now. And this occurred to me. This is live breaking news here. It just occurred to me that I actually carry more money, and it goes with the diary study. And I actually think it's because, for a while the branches closed, and now I've changed my behavior. Those branches are back open, and I actually can look at my text messages, and when my wife is going to the bank going, oh, go ahead and take an extra 100 out so we have it. That would have never happened pre-COVID. It's just now that's my behavior. Now, what we spend it on, who knows? Like, I'm not sure that I think the kids get the money, but that's a different story. The other thing that was really interesting in the Javelin study, and it's not speaking out of both sides of the mouth, it's the unbanked population that they interviewed. Now, they don't say where and how much. They just said they talk about this. And I read a couple articles about the study too. So in fairness, I read this study, found a whole bunch of different things about it. And they talk about unbanked Americans actually, expressing the need for easier ways to use digital payment for them. And they are very easy today. We talk about this, that most, if not all of the digital payments, and I want to be clear on this because crypto and digital payment, they all mean different things. And I think they often get lumped together, which creates that confusion. Like when you're talking about tap and pay, that's one form of contactless, right? Like we know that. So, there's arguments, and I'm not sure where I sit on it, that Apple Pay is not tap and pay. I'm like, but tap and pay with the card is different than tap and pay with a mobile device. And there probably is. So, you do have that piece. But what I found interesting is that it said that 29% of unbanked Americans said they found the need to figure out ways to create a digital wallet, and they were able to do that. And I can't speculate, but I know just based on reading it, in some cases, Starbucks, there's a lot of companies that allow you to load cash onto their app. So because it doesn't say this, it does say 29% of the unbanked folks they talked to during the last 18 to 24 months found the need to have a digital form of payment. And then it goes on to further say that the importance of expanding the digital payment landscape for people that want to use cash, meaning that what you and I always talk about, Shaun, if you take cash and put it into your Venmo, from your bank, it's not cash, right? We know that. But if you take cash and put it into an ATM to convert it to something, or if you go to Starbucks and give them $100 bill to use their app, you're still using cash. You're just converting that cash into their digital payment. So that, I thought that was an interesting side note. And the truth is, I think that, again, the definition of contactless payment, when you peel back the onion, are people, are they taking those app-based that are loaded with cash and calling that digital payment when they're doing these studies? I would argue all day long that that's not the same as a credit card. It's not the same as a debit card. You're physically taking dollars and using it at a single merchant. And there's, so that's a very interesting thing.
Yeah, and that's the only place that I can think of. I've only thought of this in the few minutes that you've been speaking, but I'm trying to think, if you're unbanked, to have a digital payment, the only ones I can think of are the cases that you're talking about, where it's like a closed system for a retailer.
I think there's a lot of, and maybe this is a great conversation because maybe I'm miscalculating it. So Green Dot, all of these prepaid debit cards where you have to load cash onto them, I think that's what the study was
But don't you
saying.
need to? Do you need to be? I guess you don't need to be banked because
No, no,
it's not your bank account. It's not your
yeah,
debit card.
you can
It's just
actually,
a
yeah. I don't know Green Dot's the best example, but I know that
yeah.
I don't. There's a term for it, and shame on me, and I know this, and there's a term for it, and it started with like the concept of give your kids a credit card without giving them a credit card, and it was like a prepaid debit card. But there are a couple places where you
It's
can actually load
green light or something like that.
yeah,
I've got
exactly.
that.
Yeah, I
But
can't remember the so that is still now. I'm sure.
still
You
tied.
know,
A
should,
lot of them are tied to a bank account though,
yeah,
somewhere along
yeah.
the
A lot
line.
of them because of the piece of this. But one of the things I know, and I read this in another study is, and I'm not the prepaid credit cards. People were buying those in cash
Yeah,
so
okay.
that they could use
Yeah.
online merchants and things like that. So
Yep.
again, full disclosure, Shaun and I'm always say this. I don't know who they talk to. So the way I read it was things like, I can't buy this without a credit card. So now I need to go to CVS and buy a prepaid card with $100 bill and things like
Right.
that. And that's kind of the ecosystem of when, and I'll tie this a little to crypto, when people confuse central banks with saying they're going to come up with a digital currency. No. A centralized digital currency is the complete opposite of a cryptocurrency. It's allowing people to use a fiat currency in a different way when a bank is backing it. So I think that if you're unbanked, that's that gray area of like, I have to go and buy this prepaid card or load it on something else to do it. So I do know that with PayPal and Venmo, they were exploring ways to allow people to load cash directly on it. Now, that's that quasi banking, right? Because they have to report their financial institutions, but it's a very valid point, and the numbers are all over the place. I know that Arizona, I think for the longest time, was the most unbanked in the U.S. state, and people would go, "Oh, it's just one state that has that percentage," but that's this is and as someone who did a lot of research in the past and a lot of things, you have to get people to tell you they're unbanked to figure it out. So like it's not as easy because the general assumption is if you are not a citizen, you generally don't raise your hand and go, look at me, I'm not. There is a big, you don't know what the undefined number is. And so all of the unbanked numbers, the struggle is they use census data, they use all this data that is flawed because there is a percentage of that population that's missing. So I firmly believe that if we ever could peel the onion back, we would see that the unbanked population is larger than we think.
Yeah. Well, and then there's, that's like the extreme. The unbanked has this percent, and then there's those that, fully banked, use electronic bank funded, that just are all into the bank system. But then there's all ranges in the middle. And when you start throwing in the spectrum of those that are banked, but prefer not to transact via credit card and all that sort of stuff and use cash, now you're like way up the percentages, right? I mean, you're already at the unbanked is a significant percentage, and then you throw in, okay, yeah, I'm banked, but I don't want to use my debit card and the bank provided funding credit cards. I still want to use cash. Now you're like from that 30% unbanked plus a huge percentage before you get far enough down the spectrum where you're not using cash, which that's a huge part too. But so it's where in that range are you? But you're right on the CBDC stuff, the central bank digital currency stuff. For the unbanked, definitely not a solution because you're going to need to access it. So that's not going to work. And for those that care about not being traced and transacting in cash, sorry, that's not a solution. Yeah. So where is the use case for it? It's for people that are already banked and that are probably already using electronic digital transactions to some extent. So I'm not sure. I don't know. Maybe, is the Federal Reserve going to give every individual consumer an account at the central bank? I highly doubt it. So someone's going to have to run that system, and you're going to need a bank account somewhere. So I don't know.
Yeah. So and we did something together. Gosh, I don't know when, and I think I did it on a webinar for you, and then for APAC. the impact, like about consumer trends and usage. So I'm going off of memory because I memorized my deck, so I'm usually pretty good. But there was a study in 2019 about unbanked Americans, and in 2019, it was 5% of the U.S. population, and it's only 5%. That 7.5 million people probably. That's a big number, and we know that that it's more, it's not less from the unbanked population. And then your other key, and I don't, I think I got in trouble once for saying this, but I wasn't saying it jokingly. The old school population, the people that are that's just the only way to say it. Like, I know this is here, it's mine. I've got it under the mattress. I've got it in the shoebox. I've got it in the safe in the basement. And of course, I use a bank too. And I don't use credit cards. I don't. And the funny thing, and this is I was at an airport, real story, and I'm travel a lot, and I was sitting next to an individual, and we were chatting, and believe it or not, the podcast came up. This was not too long ago, and he was a fairly, I didn't realize at the time, a fairly well-to-do business person who happened to be in the hedge funds business. We'd never known. We were sitting, probably typical, right? Sitting at the hotel, or sitting at the bar at the airport, waiting for the plane, chatting, meeting people, networking. And we were talking about cash usage. And he said, I don't use credit cards at all. And I said, really? And he said, yeah. And I said, you're a banker? No, I'm a hedge, no, I'm not a banker. I hedge fund. And he said, I would never use a debit card because then they have access to my bank account, even though I can get it back. And he said, why would I use a credit card? He said, why would I use a credit card? And I'm earning interest on my money. I'm not using, and I said, well, what do you pay back? He said, of course I have credit cards, but he said, I almost exclusively do everything in cash. And it kind of, what you just said reminded me, like, you would never think it if you met this guy and talked to him. And when you started really digging in and as always, I connect with people on LinkedIn Afternoon, and he's definitely who he said he was. And so, a stranger, he's outward like, yeah, no way. And so there is that population. And I think sometimes, and I'm speaking, very generally here, people assume when you and I talk about this is folks that don't necessarily have a lot of money. And it's sometimes actually privately held small business owners, the people that have just the old school mentality of population. And I have a personal friend who owns several diners in New York. And I remember when I met him, he said, we use cash for everything. And it's not because there's any nefarious action. It's just my dad brought us up that way. And when we took over the business, he's like, he always paid everybody in cash, and it would just kept that way. And he said, now I'm looking at it going, this is pretty crazy. Like, but that is also a thing, is it just follows the family tradition. And he said, my dad came here from another country and had a safe in the basement, and we paid taxes and did all those things. And but he just said, I feel safe with the money here. A little bit crazy in 2022 to think that, but that still happens. Yeah. And to your point, we have no idea what the real number is. And even if it was only an additional 5% of the population, it's still a lot of people. So, and I think we continuously bring this up, I think on the podcast, so people just think differently, because I would say that, in today's day and age, if you have consumers coming into your stores or your establishments, or you're doing business with them, you want to be able to take their payment the way they want to pay you, because consumers have a lot of options. Mm-hmm. And if they aren't happy, they will find a place to be happy. And that's what I say all the time. Like, majority of my work today, it's 50-50 retail banking. We do some aerospace, all sorts of, but like when I talk to retailers, the most important thing is that customer never wants to leave you, never wants to go anywhere. So you have to really be equipped to take the payment the way they want to take it. And your comment about the UK and gosh, maybe it was Australia, you might know, because I can't remember. There's another country that limited cash, and immediately there was uproar. They limited, like, you couldn't pay over a certain amount, and then immediately it was discriminatory. Or like, how come you'll take money from this person and that person? So to my knowledge, everywhere there's been any cash reduction strategy, it comes back to, it's an unfair way to do business. It frustrates people. And then I'm quite certain, and I'll look this up for the next podcast because I remember this, I'm quite certain that there was a country that had a major issue because it became discriminatory, because people said, you can't tell me no. And so, I think the UK, I'm actually looking forward to that panel. I really want to hear what's said on it, because I do think and I'll put my risk and my risk hat on and say, this is where I'm not opinionated. There is a lot more work, risk, and cost involved than people think of digitizing. So, from chargebacks to fraud implications, to customer implications, to privacy concerns. And I say this all the time, my digital risk footprint, every time you add a digital layer, you increase that digital risk footprint. So as a merchant, there's a lot of things behind the scenes, and you need to, I'm not suggesting you don't do these things. You need to be able to take the gamut, but it isn't as simple like, oh, this is much easier than cash because now I don't have to deal with getting the money to the bank. No, there's a lot more behind the scenes, infrastructure, technology wise, that really happens. And so the balance has to be there. And I don't think we as an industry talk enough about the cost of fraud and mitigation of a cyber incident. And what happens, the more digital payments, the more data I collect, the more risk I assume. So there's that balancing act too. It's not that simple. I mean, I wish it was just
it's not. And to your point about turning people away as a business, you definitely don't want to do that. And if somebody wants to spend money, you want to take it.
Yep.
And it leaves a bad taste in people's mouths. I mean, just think about the number of times it's almost like a personal offense, right? And I don't care if it's cash or anything. Like I'll go to the Dunkin' Donuts down the street, and I've got my QR code from Dunkin' Donuts, and I'll stick it out the window for them to scan it. And then at least once a week, they're like, "Oh yeah, no, that my scanner's not working," and I'm like, "Well, why aren't you? Why? That's how I pay. I mean, are you gonna take?" And they're like, "No." I'm like, well, now I gotta like find a credit card. I gotta find cash. I don't know where any of that is. This is on my phone. And then like if the person has like an attitude about it, then it's like a very negative like thing. Like you're not gonna take my payment. So it's the same, maybe even stronger with cash. If you're not going to accept cash and it's good, and it's not like there's a system failure, it's like you can easily just take it.
What you just said is exactly what I was trying to get to, is the technology behind it has to work, and it adds a layer of complexity. And if you don't have the option to take cash, you have eliminated the sale. So I was actually right by you not too long ago for a meeting, and I was in a Starbucks, and I'm not a big Starbucks guy. I love coffee, but but we were in Starbucks, and I actually went inside because there was no drive-through, and I was just outside of DC, and I was online. The line was really long, and I was getting like, what the hell is going on? Sorry to say it like that, but like, this is crazy. Like, and their registers were down, and they could only take cash. I was the only person in the building that had cash for some crazy reason, probably because, and a lot of the people were walking out frustrated. And there was a guy who was standing there, and I don't know if he was a construction worker or, what he was doing, but he had a big order for a whole bunch of people. And he's like, no, I got to bring coffee back. He's like, I can't not do this. So I said, do you have the Starbucks app? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, well, you can just load money on it and try that. And the guy was like, no, our computers are completely down. We can only take cash. So I said to the guy, how much is the order? And he's like, well, it's not, it doesn't matter. They're not going to take it. So I paid for his order, and he Venmoed me the money right there. And I said, man, and he's like, oh, thinking, I'm like, no, it's no big deal. This would never happen. But the craziest thing of all is everybody walked out except for this guy. And although it sounds silly, like you're going to a job site, it's your day to bring the coffee, and this guy's going like, I gotta bring coffee. Like, this is not going to be pleasant. It's 5:30, it's whatever 6, whatever the time they open. And all I went back to is the exact thing that you just said is, what if it was the week that Starbucks said we don't take cash? They're a business, like they can't do anything. And my other story was, I was across the street from our office. There's a Shake Shack, and I went in and ordered a cheeseburger. And the manager, it was definitely the manager, told me I'm the manager, and he said, our credit card system's down. If you don't have cash, lunch is on us. And I said, so how many people have you given lunch to? And he said, everybody.
Yeah, exactly.
He said, and he said, but it's not your problem. And he said, I'm the manager of the store, and he said, I'm going to guess you work pretty close because, and I said, yeah, I work on the street. He said, so I'm pretty sure you wouldn't be too happy if I told you that I couldn't give you the food. And the funny thing is, yes, that was the right thing. But again, you're in this status of the technology piece is great when it works, but when it doesn't work, you don't have an alternative. So, that's a real issue. And again, I'm not suggesting at all that you don't take credit cards or any of those things. I'm just saying you got to be able to take everything or you have a challenge. And I'll leave with this and turn it back over to you. You remember the day, like when you'd go into a store and they only took Visa or MasterCard, like,
Right.
and you'd be like, you don't, or like, forget about Discover, because no one took Discover 100 years ago. Very, even 25 years ago, Discover and American Express were not taking it. And you'd go to some places that would only take Visa or MasterCard. How could you imagine that today? What a disruption it would be.
Oh my God. Yeah. No, yeah, you're right. Yeah. No, I mean, to that point, I've got this, we all have our routines, right? So it's like I get gas, and at the gas station I go to, you can like go on your phone, open their app and be like, oh, I'm at pump 3. And it like authorizes the pump and everything goes through the app. It's, does it save any time? I don't know, but I find it fun. So I do it. But it was one of those days where I wanted to go to like McDonald's, the gas station. I don't know why I would have gone to Dunkin' Donuts and McDonald's, but anyway, I think I was going to go to McDonald's. I couldn't log into that app and the line was long. So I was like, screw it. I'm not going to McDonald's. So I didn't go there. And then I go to the gas station and the app wasn't working for that either. And then I was going over to Dunkin' Donuts and I had this other, like, this may have been the time I had the app store there. It was just so frustrating. But at the time, at the end of the day, I was like, I'm not going out anymore for today. Like this, just the technology piece did not work anywhere. I give up. I'm going to try again tomorrow. But, it's one of those things where I didn't even, if I really needed something, if I really needed to go to that gas station, or yes, cash is always the option where I could do it. I could just wait till the next day and it was fine. Yep. But it's nice to have the backup. So I think it's interesting and that sort of stuff. It's just the world we live in. It's a different thing, and everybody's got such a short fuse now, more than in at least what I remember in the past. I think everybody's just super stressed with the pandemic, obviously, and the state of the world and what have you. Everybody's got a short fuse, and you don't want to be picking a fight with somebody over how they're going to pay or not taking their cash. It's just it's like it could be the straw that breaks the camel back. You just don't want to go there. I mean, but anyway, I think all this stuff, I mean, Tom and I have been going for a while now, just talking about this stuff. I mean, it's these topics and so much more are what the cash industry and the payments industry more broadly really needs to talk about in the coming years. And that's why we're excited to get everybody back together. So we're looking forward to the event at the end of February, where this plus a whole lot more technical stuff on currency is going to be talked about. But we've also got the digital currency conference the end of that same week, where we're going to delve into a lot of this digital currency topics as well, with representatives from all over the world and the different regulators and just global organizations that are looking at this stuff. The IMF, the World Bank, different central banks around the world. The Fed's going to be there to talk a little bit about their CBDC paper that just came out. So we've got a whole lot of content coming up at the end of February. And as Tom said, we're going to be there live, broadcasting. I'll leave my dog at home so he's not barking in the background. Yeah, so we're looking forward to seeing everybody in Washington at the end of February.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Shaun said it. We're looking forward to it. It's going to be fun, and we're going to cover all the things we're talking about. And I think, if you're listening to the podcast today, reach out to one of us if you want to talk about consumer trends and you want to talk about things. So that's really the object of what we want to do, is just continue to keep the conversation going and try to get all of the potential challenges out there to help solve the problems that we're all facing with. I know we talked a lot about coin shortage last time. I'm sure there'll be some conversations about coin in DC, and the reality is we want to talk about everything related to currency, cash, payments, and nothing's off limits, nothing's off the record for us, where we're here to talk about it. And we may not be always the right people. That's why we like guests to come on, and we do try to research and get as much. So certainly looking forward to seeing everybody. We're going to be there live. You're going to see the banners, the one behind me. Yeah. Well, I'm pretty sure we'll have some Cash News hats. It's winter time, so we might even have some winter hats.
Yeah, we should definitely bring the winter hats. February in DC could be a bit chilly.
Yeah, a little bit chilly today. So funny story. I don't know about DC, but here in New Jersey, the weather forecast this morning, and by three major, weather was, we should expect somewhere between 3 and 50 inches of snow.
3 and 50.
Yeah. So
Cool.
I'm not sure what that means. I'm pretty sure it means it's definitely going to snow. But just to be very clear, if we get 50 inches of snow, it'll be very interesting. If we get anything more than 2 feet of snow, it'll be pretty interesting. And I think 1921 was the last time we got more than 50 inches of snow in the Northeast. In our lifetimes, I think in the mid 90s, there was about 40 inches of snow that was just destroyed the whole entire Northeast. Was shut down for weeks, and then so I don't know. I'll leave you with that. But what's the weather forecast in DC? Is this bomb cyclone coming?
Last I saw, it was gonna mostly miss us and intensify up near you guys. Yeah, we were supposed to get maybe 2 inches overnight or something. Nothing, just gonna sk us and then dump on you. Of course, I will say, a couple of weeks ago, right after New Year's, when the kids were supposed to go back to school, that Sunday night, Monday, I think, there was a storm that came in that was only supposed to be a few inches, and we ended up here getting about a foot. And a foot in DC area is a foot. It's a lot of snow for this area, and schools were closed for the next week. So
all week,
Monday through Friday. Yeah.
Wow, that's interesting. I would venture to say that if it's under 3 feet and happens on Saturday, that they would have schools open by Tuesday. If it's over 3 feet, there's just nowhere to put there's just nowhere to stick it. I mean, that's the challenge. And if you get into New York City, they dump it in the Hudson River, it's a real big challenge. So I love snow. My kids love snow, but I will tell you right now, we will probably have because if there's still power, we'll have nothing to do. Shaun and I will do a special podcast in the snow. If it's over 3 feet, it'll be the
over
snowcast.
3 feet. We'll have a snowcast. I like it.
Snowcast. And we'll go from there. But thanks everybody for listening. Please, please, please. I know I say this every time, but I still am puzzled by it. Like and subscribe. We are on YouTube, so you can watch us. I know that most people listen to us. If you really wanted to see Shaun and I, you could watch us. I mean, that's I understand if you just want to listen. We understand that as well. And when you do subscribe and review, it really does help the podcast. So please do that. And I know I tell this story all the time because I think it's so relevant. Is a lot of folks tell me they love the podcast, and then when I ask where they listen to and if they're subscribed, they don't know how to tell me. As a matter of fact, just last week, someone said, I listened to it on Alexa, and I said, oh, so what do you do? I just say, pay the Cash News podcast, and it works. And I'm like, so you're not subscribed. And that's still amazing that people listen. And nothing warms my heart more than hearing you and Shaun are hilarious, or you guys were so much funnier in person than you are. And I'm like, hey, what does that mean? Yeah. But the reality here is the podcast is really for everybody out there. We hope it's useful. So thanks for listening, and we will see you next week.
All right. Take care, everybody. Stay out of the snow or get in it, whatever you want to do.
Thanks for listening to the Cash News Podcast. We hope you found this episode insightful. Don't forget to like and review us on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter, and be sure to visit us at thecashnews.com to stay up to date with the latest on the world of cash. Thanks again for listening to the Cash News Podcast.